Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this first webinar in a series of 4 that I will further describe on universities and the future of scholarly publishing. This is an important event for EUA. And first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Patrick Lévy. I'm a professor at Grenoble University in France. And I'm also a EUA board member. And one of my interests, in my portfolio is actually open access and open science and open access. First go on a sort of definition of what we are going to talk about this afternoon. We may actually just remind you you all know that, but the definition of open access, which refers to free availability on the public internet, with permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full text of these articles, scroll them for indexing, pass them as data or to software, or use them for any other lawful purpose without financial, legal, or technical barriers others than those inseparable from gaining access to the internet itself. And this is the Berlin Declaration on Open Access to Knowledge in the Science and Humanities. So to this, as I mentioned, is the first webinar of series of 4. This one is entitled Into the Unknown, Most Likely Futures for Open Access Publishing. There was one on the 25th of May, Universities and the Promises of Scholar-Led Publishing. The 8th of June, Quo Vadis Transformative Agreements. And the last one, which actually is restricted to the EUA members, it's Let's Get Practical, Aligning Institutional Policies with Plan S. So for this today webinar, we have a very outstanding panel that I will introduce in details during the webinar. We have Jean-Pierre Finance, we have Astrid Söderberg-Widing, Claire Redet, Monique Trump, Jan Moss, Bjorn Brambles, and Lilia Borel-Damian. And actually, we already almost have all the stakeholders, apart maybe some governments, in this webinar. And this is, of course, intentional. We want to cover the whole field with all the participants, all the stakeholders of this important domain. Now, to start with, I will actually introduce Jean-Pierre Finance. Jean-Pierre is chair of the EUA expert group on Science 2.0 and Open Science. He chaired the steering committee of the EUA Read and Publish study, which was commissioned to Technopolis. And of course, you may know him, but Jean-Pierre has a thorough understanding of the institutional challenges in the transition to open access, as well as a view on negotiations with publishers. So, Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Patrick, if I may, Sebastian.
Yes. Yeah.
We seem to have lost Jean-Pierre. Could you try to start the presentation?
I could. I can, and even, of course. So sorry for that. Well, actually, what Jean-Pierre was supposed to tell you, and of course he's more an expert than I am, but is why openness and transparency are important. And this is actually summarized in these 4 items. The first one is increasing the visibility of research articles, research data, and other research outputs. And of course, this is important. A second and very important implication is to also fostering research integrity, cooperation, and knowledge sharing. And this is something, of course, equally important. The third one is improving research producibility, replicability, and reuse of research outcomes. And I don't know if gaining, but probably regaining scientific sovereignty. And this is, of course, among the EUA strategic priorities. We have actually said that in a strategic plan, and you have actually here the headlines of that, which actually are linked to what I previously mentioned. We want to be in the effective advocacy. We have an horizon scanning. We want to promote European solidarity, and we want to support the enabling of an enhanced performance. So in a sense, that's why EUA is, of course, very much involved in promoting open access. Now, if we detail that, effective advocacy, it means that we want to push on ambitious open access policies at institutional, national, and European level. And that's, of course, towards a full and immediate open access. We want to promote, of course, the author's right retention. We want to avoid any restriction to openly share research outputs. And we, of course, support more transparency and greater sustainability in the scholarly publishing system. Horizon scanning, it means that since 2014, we have actually monitored the implementation of open access policies in European universities, and also the policy and legal developments in open access relevant to the university sector. Since 2017, there was gathering of comprehensive data on big deals. And in 2020, we had the read and publish study. Now, there is a very important political issue. We need, and there is a need for systemic, cultural, and technical reforms. And that needs to have no one left behind. And this also is in terms of support to European university, and this support is in improving researchers' engagement in open access. And we know that the institutional will is important, and also to highlight the importance of implementing monitoring mechanism of open access. And in terms of capacity building, there is, of course, the platform for negotiating consortia, and also we will have a view on that, the EUA Big Deal Survey reports and the Read and Publish study. So this is our political intention to support European solidarity and to enable enhanced performance. Now, if we don't get back Jean-Pierre, maybe we can set the scene with the highlights from the EUA Read and Publish study. The objective was actually to have a cross-sector inquiry into the possible short-term and long-term implication of a publish and read system and its alternatives. And this is actually a diagram which illustrates the reader's side of the system and the author's side of the system, with the scholars, the negotiation consortia, with the reader's institution, the author's institution, and the libraries. And of course, the contracts which are negotiate with the publishers, either to read or to publish. And of course, one important part of the piece of the system is the funders, are the funders. And of course, this is negotiated at the level of institutions, but also governments at the very end. Now, the objective was, as I mentioned, to have a cross-sector analysis inquiry. And the the results actually are summarized into what we call the transformative deals, the open access platform, and what will be realistic in a sense, publisher owned or desirable community owned. Well, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry that we actually missed Jean-Pierre. I don't know, there's probably a technical problem. I don't know if maybe Jean-Pierre can join us further during the webinar. Now, well, I think we have to actually go to the different panelists, and I'm actually pleased to call on Astrid Söderberg-Widing. Astrid Söderberg-Widing has served as president of Stockholm University since 2013, and has also chaired the board for the Association of the Swedish Higher Education Institutions since 2019. She also chairs the steering committee of the BIBSAM consortium, which is responsible for the Swedish turn to open access and handling all these with major publishing companies since 2016. And she also founded an international open access journal in humanities in 2009. She's also a fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, the Academia Europea, and the Royal Swedish Academy of Letters, History, and Antiquities. So Astrid, the floor is yours for a short view on open access from your side.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this webinar, which I, as you heard, do in my double capacity, both as rector and as chair of the Swedish BIBSAM consortium. So first of all, I would like to thank and congratulate the EUA to an excellent report, and also for organizing this timely seminar series. And in my short introductory statement, I would first of all strongly like to underline that we now have a unique momentum with Coalition S and the transformative agreements in place. But we have to prepare to moving beyond them, and this is urgent. Already in 2023, the existing agreements will have to be renegotiated, as Coalition S will no longer accept them in their existing form after 2024. It is thus now or never that we have a real opportunity to actually change the system, and this work has to be done instantly. If we don't succeed, there is a considerable risk that we will still, in the future, in spite of the turn to open access, be dependent on a business model which was only supposed to be transitory, and where future agreements risk to be made on publishers' terms only. As the EUA report clearly shows, not only the old subscription model, but also today's model with transformative agreements is unsustainable and still suffers from a certain lack of transparency. We, as consortia, as universities, and as researchers, need to know what we are paying for. What we know now is that a large part of the income, up to around 40%, is pure profit for the publishers. So we will have to work creatively on several possible ways forward. We do need to change the business model for publish and read agreements in order for a long-term, more radical change of the scholarly publishing market to take place. We need to look at and to develop alternative models, such as the platform scenarios explored in the EUA report, where the publisher-owned platforms, as we heard, are probably rightly considered most realistic. But the community-owned platforms, despite their challenges, would in the long term, from many perspectives, be the most desirable solution, with scholarly publishing getting back where it belongs, in the hands of the scholars themselves. But it is, as is also underlined in the report, both platform models may very well also coexist. In Sweden, we have recently created a new working group called Beyond Transformative Agreements, and I've just come from its second meeting, a workshop on future scenarios, where researchers, funding agencies, libraries, and university leadership representatives work together to try to reflect on and to develop models also in dialogue with publishers in order to find realistic solutions for a way forward into the unknown. But what we also have to do, and this is also urgent, is to look further into and to change the research performance assessment mechanisms. As more and more universities, funders, and even publishers are signing the DORA Declaration, this should also mean that the whole system in practice should turn away from using journal-based metrics, such as journal impact factors, to instead implement an assessment of the quality of individual research articles and other outputs. However, as is rightly emphasized in the EUA report, this is a slow process. But this also makes the whole question of open access publishing a burning issue, not only for funders, publishers, or consortia, but for university leadership. And that is why it is so important that EUA has engaged in this. Without the implementation of new alternative policies for assessing research performance, we will be stuck within a fossilized system. All of this requires broad, transnational, global collaboration, where Europe is an important node. We need to work more systematically on developing common strategies to move forward if we want to achieve the transition from the old subscription-based model through transformative agreements to a new dynamic scholarly publishing system for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid. That was a very clear message. And I think we'll be back to you for the questions. As I mentioned, we ambition to have all the stakeholders present. So Astrid was representing to some extent the university and consortia. And I want now to give the floor to Claire Redet, which represents the open access publisher. So Claire is serves as executive director for the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association since 2016, and has been based there for the past 9 years. Prior to that, Claire has been working for 12 years in the academic publishing sector, and in her current role, she leads the development and growth of the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association, which is a non-profit association of scholar-led and professional publishers of books, journal, infrastructures, and other services. Claire, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you to EUA for the opportunity to participate in this webinar, and it's a real honour to follow Astrid. You may know OASPA. We're an organisation entirely focused on open access. For those of you who are not familiar, OASPA has a diverse global membership. We have publishing organisations of all types and sizes, fully open access publishers, mixed model, scholar-led initiatives, university presses and library publishers, individual volunteer-run journals, book publishers, and the supporting services and infrastructure that are key for open access to operate. Our mission is focused on enabling open access as the predominant model for scholarly publishing, and our work includes a range of activities to show innovation in open scholarship, share experiences, and promote best practice. Much of the work we do is for the benefit of small organisations or individual journals, and very often extends outside of our membership. The study EUA commissioned shows to me that our two organisations are quite well aligned. OASPA works to support a healthy and diverse open access market as part of our mission. And like you, we're thinking about how to achieve a fully open, sustainable, and importantly, an equitable publishing system into the future. The EUA study is very welcome and shows some interesting results. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to offer some comments from my perspective. With regards to the scenario 2 that was outlined, which focused on read and publish agreements, I can't see that a situation could easily exist where all institutions are making agreements with all publishers. The so-called long tail is very long indeed. It seems impractical. There are a lot of very small publishers, and the vast majority just can't get a seat at the table. Even the bigger fully open access publishers find it difficult to discuss agreements with institutions, generally because library bandwidth and money is taken up by the largest mixed model publishers. And we actually have a blog post today on the OASPA blog from a group of our members, which comments on this, and you can look that up. I do know that read and publish deals are an important mechanism for many of our mixed model members, and in particular are important for society publishers aiming to transition. Incidentally, you may have seen the announcement from the Royal Society last week in which they pledged their commitment to flip several of their journals to open access in 5 years, and they will publish their progress each year, holding themselves publicly accountable. This wouldn't be possible without the huge effort involved to form agreements with institutions like yours. What I do feel concerned about, ironically, is the shift moving forward in these agreements, particularly the large deals, from read to publish. We want to see that transition to open access, but this is quite a fundamental shift in content flow. It's quite possible that transformative agreements will be diverting content from researchers who may have chosen to publish elsewhere. Many institutions naturally actively promote the agreements that they have to make sure that the money they've spent is well utilised. But we don't really know what the consequences of this shift will be further down the line, with greater numbers of papers being funneled via these agreements that were previously based on readership, and whether that further embeds the status quo. So monitoring and tracking as we move forward is therefore really critical, which I know EUA members are already aware of. OASPA launched the OA Switchboard last year. This is to get away from the need for all of those multilateral connections between funders, institutions and publishers. There's a website, or you can find out about that via our OASPA website as well. But the OA Switchboard can also provide an easy means for reporting or monitoring. That's what some of our earliest participants are using, with or without a publisher agreement in place, for accessing central OA funds, but also has the potential for monitoring publications in no fee or so-called diamond journals, and for open access books. And we're exploring all of these ideas into the future, and as well for things like standardizing identifiers. What I would like to see is a mix of scenarios 3 and 4, which would enable the diversity of models we see within OASPA to thrive. Publishing organisations are providing valued services, but getting a foothold in the current market is hard. It's a difficult space for all smaller publishers, commercial or not. I don't want to see a system that develops to become entirely dependent on APCs. As we know, they work for some, but not for all. And there are already a good number of excellent community-driven and scholar-led alternatives within our OASPA membership, particularly for open access books, where the exciting innovation in new models and collective funding approaches is really great to see. It's important to remember that publishers are not just one type of organisation. And also, I think it's a mistake to hold on to the idea that contracts will need to look like they do now. Scenario 4 lends itself to including no-fee publishing and collective models, and there are new ways of providing financial support for scholarly communication. These will benefit from a coordinated approach from institutions, funders, and governments. Finally, it's not just about the content. It's really important that the infrastructure that the content is dependent on, or that helps us ensure quality, connectedness, and interoperability of open publishing systems, need to be strategically supported into the future. It will take continued collaborative effort to bring about the changes we want to see, and intentional funding choices and support mechanisms to be developed. Importantly, achieving the open access future we want isn't going to be clean cut, and I believe will take a variety of approaches and experimentation with new ways of doing things.
Thank you, Claire. I think you set the stage for many discussion for the panel in a couple of minutes. Well, I think now we can call on Monique Tromp, and this is the researcher voice. Monique Tromp is actually she serves as the vice chair of the Young Academy of Europe, which is a bottom-up initiative of a dynamic and innovative group of recognized European young researchers working on the raising awareness and engagement on science and science policy. Professor Trump is also chair of material chemistry of the Zernike Institute at the University of Groningen since 2018. Monique, the chair is yours. The school is yours.
Thanks very much, Patrick. So you kind of explained my first initial statement. So yes, I am Monique Tromp. I'm a scientist, but I'm also here as the vice chair of the Young Academy Europe. And as you have said, we are a pan-European initiative of young scientists, and we work towards networking at advocacy, but also science exchange and science policy. And we provide, or we try to provide, input and advice from a younger generation's perspective, which is vital, we think, to shape EU-wide policy for the benefit of future European scholars and scientists. So the Young Academy Europe work on open science and also Plan S, also as a member of the Initiative for Science organization. So that's maybe a good link to mention. Open science is a topic which I think all scientists in principle agree on, also amongst young scholars. And only if we share and discuss all papers, but also all data at hand, we can truly advance science. However, we've all gotten used to the system which has been built over the years, have our own preferred and respected ranked journals, and use publications in those to assess quality and impact of research and people with all its strengths and limitations. And to immediately emphasize, the working practices here are not fully uniform across disciplines. Some disciplines are already used to putting their work up in open access archives, like, for example, the physics community, whereas other communities, like the chemistry one, prefers to publish their work in their society journals. And it is very dependent on the country you work in, its financial situation, to what effect it wants to and can support open science, if it can afford paying, for example, transformative agreements, author publishing costs, etc. We as Young Academy Europe are therefore convinced that open science needs to be discussed together with overall academic culture. That is crucial, especially for young scholars like the Young Academy Europe is representing. Early and mid-career researchers are not yet established and need to prove themselves, gain visibility and impact. And the most practical way to do this is to publish in journals which are recognized by their field. However, the overall academic system for scientists at all levels is hyper-competitive. There's limited funding, there are limited positions, and hence researchers are under pressure from universities, funding agencies, to produce breakthroughs at every publication. Evaluation parameters like the use of age index, impact factor, numbers of citations have been and are still used to decide on funding, but also on the status and career progression of academics. So the recognition and rewarding of research and people has to change to make any new open science scenario attractive and viable from a scientist point of view. We see that especially young people push this, but if the established generation does not accept and value this, and for example, do not value their open access publication in perhaps a less typical journal, it can be detrimental for their careers. The best open science scenario of future is difficult to answer from a perspective of representing all young scientists in all fields, because of the different practices, as I've just mentioned. Hence, different disciplines will prefer different ways forward. So an initial assessment from a young scholar's perspective seems to lean towards a combination of scenarios as presented in the report to best serve the different fields. Young Academy Europe is very much part of the discussions with EUA, ISE and others to go forward. But it is also evident to us that whatever open science system we choose has to go hand in hand with cultural change across the academic world. And we need to make an effort to get all countries on board, irrespective of their financial means. In some places, this is of course already happening. From a personal experience point of view, the Netherlands are quite far in the process here, which some people find scary in itself, because it will only work if we all do this. The funding agencies and universities in the Netherlands have signed up to DORA and Plan S and demand fair and open science. A working group has presented a white paper, and committees at all universities are working towards a new method of recognition and rewarding. So how is or will this be implemented? And I can just mention a few examples, because also the Netherlands has just started. But for example, people are not just judged on their age index or impact factor anymore, but have a completely different recognition and rewarding system based on the full set of activities people do and want to be judged upon, which can include research, of course, but also management, teaching, policy advice, etc. If the assessment criteria for both career and funding diversify, the pressure on the system and on people will hopefully decrease and allow an easier transfer to change the method of publishing. So not the old-fashioned journals per se, but open science journals. For science and science funding, this, for example, means being judged on the science proposal and a narrative CV where you explain how your background and strength fit best the proposal. And it's not just about the number of publications, but you identify and explain a maximum of 5 to 10 publications to support your proposal or scientific advancement in the topic. Actually, these practices are now also being discussed at, for example, the EU and the ERC. So yes, open science is crucial to advance science, and a true scientist will support this, and so does the Young Academy Europe. But the process of transition needs to be monitored and executed carefully to not lose a generation of scientists. Especially young scientists need to advance in their fields, gain impact and respect, and it means they need a cultural change, getting away from the old-fashioned excellence assessment based on journal impact, age index, etc. But it also means it needs to be implemented and accepted worldwide to ensure continued scientific exchange and collaborations, as well as scientist mobility towards a fair academic culture.
Thank you very much. I think you covered some very important topics again for the discussion. In particular, how the career assessment is done and will be done in the future. Now I'm going to introduce for a short introduction Mr. Jan Mos. Jan Mos has been and is representing the publishers. He has been the Chief Executive Officer at STM, the International Association for Scientific, Technical and Medical Publishers, since December 2019. Prior to this, he served as Director of Public Affairs at the British recorded music industry and spent 12 years as a civil servant in the British government. So STM members, but he will probably detail that, are responsible for around 2/3 of all published papers in their areas of science, technology, medicine, social sciences and humanities. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick. As you said, STM is the leading global trade association for academic and professional publishers, and we have more than 140 members who, as you said, collectively publish more than 2/3 of all journal articles and tens of thousands of monographs and reference works. The majority of our members are small businesses and not-for-profit organizations that represent tens of thousands of publishing employees, editors, reviewers, authors and readers, and other professionals around the world. Obviously, we also represent the larger commercial publishers as well, but it's important to note that we also cover the long tail, and that's important in all of these discussions. And I echo Claire's points on the difficulties that some of those face in some of these agreements. And our members comprise the majority of a publishing industry that contributes significantly to global knowledge and to the advancement and communication of research. Publishers have long embraced the principles of open science, including its wider objectives on open access and open data, as well as research metrics, research integrity, and citizen science. But the point to make is that publishers support sustainable approaches to open access, whilst offering researchers diverse choices into how and where they publish their research under their wishes. And so I think one of the points to make in the basis of this discussion is not to fall into the trap of being too prescriptive of the model or models that will come out at the end of it. We're on a journey, and we're working collaboratively across the scholarly sector to transform the aspirations for full open access into a reality, but the perspectives on how to achieve that are not uniform. And there is not an internationally agreed consensus around the implementation of practical solutions. And though it's growing much faster than the underlying market, it is not yet the dominant publishing model. And so publishers provide free or affordable access in a variety of ways and support the sharing of articles through many routes. Wide access and the creation and dissemination of articles is enabled by a sustainable business that supports the investments in the high quality and the high integrity of the scholarly record. And such options will include gold open access, subscription-based journals, any one of a number of hybrid publishing options, transformative agreements, read and publish, and so on and so on. And there is a very mixed market at the moment, and a lot of these discussions are still ongoing, and these negotiations are ongoing, and we don't know where they will all end up. But nearly all publishers offer open access options and publish open access journals, and members indeed offer full open access platforms. For instance, F1000 as part of Taylor and Francis for the European Open Science Platform. And publishers work closely with funders, institutions and governments to facilitate these developments. And we are always open to innovation and discussion. So, there are many approaches towards our shared goal of expanding access to peer-reviewed scientific works and maximizing the value and reuse of the results of scientific research. The ESAC data estimates around 180 active transformative agreements globally. That's from a handful in 2017, a dozen in 2018, 50 in 2019. So doubling since in 2020 and the rise again. So the growth rate is very strong, but at the moment, those negotiations take a lot of time. We are feeding our way in some of those areas as to what the right models would be. But the number of journal titles indexed in the Directory of Open Access Journals grew by an annual rate of 20% from 2017 to 19. So the number of open access journals is also increasing rapidly. And publishers are pivotal in offering solutions which meet the needs of open access and contribute to open science. So our action plan to help publishers in this effort includes the ongoing commitment to work on findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable research data, FAIR data. There is an increasing need to ensure that research data is available, discoverable, reusable, interoperable for all stakeholders working across scholarly communications. And indeed, part of that process is having the infrastructure and the knowledge to help give advice to researchers themselves how and where to store data, and to slowly improve the way that we can link all that data and access that data over time. But the thing I would emphasize and recognize is that publishers make significant investments in manuscripts. And those investments are made also in the period between submission and acceptance. And we cannot shortcut that without undermining the integrity of science and research, from audience detection and cultivation to handling and protecting rights, ethics, formatting, editing, detecting plagiarism, image manipulation. Publishers safeguard the quality of research papers. And that's, whether we do it or whether someone else does it, and there are many models out there, is something that is worth protecting and maintaining. And you cannot, I think, just make that shift without making the recognition of those investments and the need for those investments to be ongoing. Because if they don't, it will undermine the ability to provide for the high quality and integrity of scholarly communication where direct funding is not possible. So, no doubt we'll discuss, but the requirement for zero embargo on the accepted manuscript provides an immediate free substitute of lesser quality than the version of record. But it also takes away the ability to invest in the process leading to publication, including the process between submission and acceptance. It also pulls against our objectives here, which is it will stall the transition of hybrid journals. It will reduce the potential for transformative deals. And so it prevents other innovations towards sustainable open access models. And as such, it is not in itself, in the long term or at scale, financially sustainable. And there are options out there in the marketplace at the moment that do have zero embargo. We're not saying that is not possible, but it is not possible at scale and in the long term financially sustainable. So I can't stress enough that our experience of online has emphasized the importance of intermediaries, trusted intermediaries. We can observe the empirical evidence of online that has made it harder for the public in particular to have confidence that what they are reading is correct and verified. And this is the importance of the version of record, a hallmark of high quality, the final checked and verified version, somewhere we can put people towards and say, at the moment, to the best of our knowledge and the best of our ability, that is the version that is worth reading. So, we're together on a journey. There are different speeds, and some wish to take different directions. And we and our members have to cater for all researcher needs. So flexibility is really important. And we still need time to find out what works and what doesn't. And so committing to one model or constraining options for publishers or authors runs, we believe, counter to the reality of different approaches from different funders, different nations, different disciplines, different stages of their career. And scholarly publishing has to offer a route for all researchers, regardless of funding, on the basis of their quality of work. So our commitment to broadening open access is a very sincere one, very sincere. But it must ensure that the vital process of verification and trust in science is maintained to a high standard, and that researchers are free to choose to publish their work in the right place for them, to reach the right community to them, to have the right conversation for that researcher. And that is an absolutely fundamental tenet of what we and our members have to provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I think you raised some very important questions on the model and also the access and the sustainability, but we'll come back to that without no doubt. I want now to give the floor to Professor Björn Brems. Björn is Professor of Neurogenetics in the Institute of Zoology of Regensburg University in Germany. In his academic position, he studies how brains initiate behavior without instruction from the environment and how subsequent experiences shape future behavior. And he's also, and that's why he's invited actually, very active in the field of open access and open science. And he has particularly a blog, which is extremely active in this field. So Björn, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation. As you've mentioned, I've been involved in these kinds of meetings and meetings like these before COVID, of course, in real life, traveling around the globe. And I have to say, not really a whole lot has changed in these 15 years. So it may well be that my statement now to some here may be a little bit confrontational, but I'm just a scientist. I'm not even professionally involved in any of this. I do this on the side, and I'm not a diplomat. So my statement today that I'm going to give in the next 2 minutes is meant only to be confrontational in the sense that it aims to confront you with the fact that the emperor, in fact, has no clothes. So for me, because this is about open access, for me, as a working scientist in the broad field of biology, biomedicine, psychology, in different fields, this may be slightly different. Access to literature ceased to be a noteworthy problem about 8 or 9 years ago now. So almost 10 years, due to many technical developments. Scientists, my colleagues, haven't really had any problems accessing the literature in nearly a decade now. Our access to the literature is almost 100%. I don't even remember the last time I couldn't access a paper. Instead, the literature-related problems that we really worry about today on a daily basis are the reliability of the literature, the affordability of what little digital infrastructure legacy publishers are allowing us to have, and the obvious inadequacy and lack of functionalities of said literature. So this is, or of the whole infrastructure actually, it's not just the literature. So that this newly developed access does not really follow the exact definition of open access as we heard it at the beginning is really only one of, and a minor one of many, many missing functionalities, and not really one that's very high on the list of most of my colleagues' list of priorities. I mean, if you look at surveys, what kind of licenses people usually would put there, they would not put a liberal license on their work. That's a separate story. So this is not really high on the list. As long as people can read it, that's the most important thing. And that's essentially solved in the last 10 years and has been solved for the last 10 years. So one might even argue in the light of very recent news that even the privacy issues caused by the legacy publishers dabbling in surveillance capitalism is more of a concern than lack of access. They're spying on us. They're even trying to convince libraries to put publisher spyware in university networks. And so people are more interested and more concerned about these things. So this is how far down the list access has dropped in the last decade, because nobody has that problem anymore these days. What that means is that any solution for the access problem comes about 10 years too late and fails to address the problems that we really have today. So discussing solutions for access in 2021 is about as appropriate and timely as discussing solutions for CFCs destroying the ozone layer after the Montreal Protocol was already ratified. In fact, to stay within this analogy, APC-based open access is sort of like rescinding the Montreal Protocol and rely on voluntary CFC reductions by industry. That's how much worse APCOA in any form would be than subscriptions. So from a researcher perspective, any attempt to tackle access as if it was still 2010 is not even a waste of time. It risks making the whole situation worse than it ever was by ignoring the actual problems that we have in 2021. So focusing on open access in 2021, I have no idea what's gotten into people that this is being treated as a problem worth solving when we have so much more important things to solve. Thank you.
Okay. Well done, I would say. Well, our last speaker for the introduction talk is Lydia Borel-Diamant, who is the Secretary General of Science Europe. She has also been working prior to that, actually, she worked for the European University Association since 2006. And she served as its director for research and innovation between January 2014 and mid-September 2019. She was a member of the steering committee of the Science Europe Coalition S Open Access Diamond Journal Study and the EUA Read and Study and Publish Study. Lydia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we do hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Very well, but that's okay.
No, I tried to change my camera, and
no problem.
I don't know why it's not working. It should be working, but mysteries of artificial intelligence. So anyway, I'll talk to this camera, and I hope that you can still see me a little bit. Thank you very much for inviting me at this webinar. It is for me a great pleasure to be here, of course, as a former Director for Research and Innovation in EUA, and as a person that, in fact, initiated the Read and Publish study. And, well, I would like to, first of all, congratulate EUA for the finalization of that study, which I could not because I left before its end. But I think the outcome is very good. I think it is an excellent piece of work, very fact-based and useful for reflection at many levels. Let me perhaps, in these introductory remarks, joined partly the line of Björn Brems, maybe not so militant, but yeah, in the line of setting up what are the real issues at stake. I think we are assisting into a shift of paradigm of the way research is conceived, and how it's done, and how it's used, how it's communicated. And this is a cultural shift. It is not just a matter of publications and assessment. It's much broader than that. I think the way scientists are looking at science is changing. And the way the society expects science to work or to get results is also changing. Perceptions are changing all the time, and so are facts. Of course, the digital technologies are of paramount importance in driving those changes. They shape up our lives, but they also shape the research sector unavoidably. Then when we come to access of information, scientific information, which is the primary source that of information that a scientist needs to do their work. Open access, open science in general has become now the main objective to achieve, and rightly so, for many reasons. Probably other speakers have said it today. Open science is one way to make, in principle, open science more efficient. Sorry, science more efficient. I think that the changing nature of the way we pose the research questions, the changing nature of the way the science is communicated, the now quite outdated paper publication as the predominant output of research. There are many more outputs of research that have a very good quality in the scholarly work, namely software, namely guidelines, namely studies of some sort that do not necessarily fit in a paper format that you can attribute a qualification such as an impact factor or any of the countable indicators. This is to say that we are shifting from a paradigm that is deeply, still very deeply entrenched into the all academic life. This paradigm of assessing publications through countable or through numerical indicators, which are proxy indicators, not assessing the direct quality of the work, to a paradigm very heavily informed by the cultural change, a paradigm that puts back the quality at the center of the assessment of any certain outputs. Therefore, despite, as Björn says, we are late, yes, we are late, but this is a situation is where we are today, unfortunately. We have to deal with the situation today. And I think that what the system needs is precisely to be able to look at all these questions in a systemic way, have the necessary data to be able to take the right decisions, and especially to be aware of what are the elements in the research culture today that are informing how research is communicated and therefore assessed. Because we are living in a system where assessment is based on the communication. Therefore, I think it would be very important for the whole scholarly publication system to be conscious of the cultural change that we are in. And in this sense, let me make my final point on a scholarly publication sector that very few talk about, which is the community-driven sector, so-called also diamond sector, that is normally being left apart or silent in the discussions on the evolution of the scholarly publication system. Science Europe believes that this sector needs to be present in the discussions. It has a right, it really is a big proportion of the system. It's not a dominant system, but it's there. It's important for many communities. And we believe it needs a place in the whole dialogue. That's why last year we funded this report on the diamond sector that we wanted to put in the horizon of the discussions. There are many conclusions of this report. I think you have one of our colleagues, Vanessa Proutman, presenting the conclusions of this report in another webinar, and I'm not going to do that here. But I wanted just to make the point that it is important that this sector of scholarly publishing is also part of this cultural development, and it needs to be included in the overarching dialogue. I think that this is, I should stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. That was also very, very clear. So we have now more than 30 minutes for a panel discussion with all the people that actually are member of this panel, and Jean-Pierre Finance, if we get back Jean-Pierre, which would be nice. So maybe to start that, if you wish. Yes, we could actually maybe comment on that slide for the panel member. This is actually the EUA 2020-21 survey results that are not published yet. They will be published in June, and actually it shows the fact that institutions closely monitor their publications. It's from nearly 60% of them monitoring the cost of publication in open access journals to 70% that monitor the number of publications in open access, and 80% that monitor the number of publications in their own repository. Another result showed that more than 2/3 of the institution did not set a specific target for open access to research publication and a timeline for achieving this target. I must mention that this is a relatively large survey with approximately 270 responses from institutions in 26 European countries, which is, I guess, representative. So maybe the question for Lydia, for Astrid, for Jean-Pierre would be, could you comment on this? Is there, from your point of view, a need for specific targets and timelines? That would be my first question, actually. I don't know who wants to actually answer particularly.
I could start perhaps.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. And I would say that as a first step, it's of course good that the number of publications and the costs are monitored, but as concerns setting the target, I think perhaps this is a little bit misleading. As for example, in Sweden, the BIBSAM consortium has a target since many years on 100% open access, and this is extremely important in the negotiations for agreements. It has been really extremely important to have this common goal, but perhaps the individual institutions within the consortium don't have specific goals. And also in Sweden, we got, so to speak, a little bit help. The government did part of the job in the research bill from last December. They also set the goal of 100% open access already in 2021, which also helps to guide and to put pressure in the work that we have to do on negotiations. But I also think that EUA has a very important role to play here, both in raising awareness, in capacity building, as we heard that you already do, and that we already do, and also supporting members aligning in the transition, because as we also heard, that there are many differences in different countries. So the situation is very different for different members. But I think that this is important, but perhaps it doesn't show the whole picture.
Okay.
Yes, I can also add something.
Please. Lydia.
Thank you. Yes, well, yes, of course, monitoring is very important. Monitoring is crucial. My comment is that it depends on what we understand by monitoring and what do we want with this monitoring. The why, the what, and the how we monitor will depend on what we are looking after. If we concentrate on numerical indicators only, well, that's very clear. It's about merely counting what's available, open access, what's not. And that is an important information that we must have. I think that this is a first problem, in fact, because not even that we can get. There are different data. It depends where you look at. It depends what you look at. It depends the source where you look at. I think we need to get rid of that. We need a good centralized way to measure, so that we can be sure that the numbers are right. At this point, of course, the work of EUA is fantastic. The work that others is fantastic as well. But there is no one agreed way of calculating these figures. So some standards on the monitoring, it would be interesting to develop. Then, apart from the numerical indicators, I think that there are process indicators which are equally valid. It's about what are the processes that enable publication in open access. Then we go into all these considerations that perhaps other colleagues and me as well raised before. That it is beyond, you need to look at the policies, you need to look at how you support the scientists to make open access a reality. But I think that next to this pure numerical monitoring, we need also process monitoring. And the monitoring is, I see you have here a bar on monitoring costs of publications in open access journals. Well, yes, but that's good to know, and we have to know it. But I think that what is important is to know the total costs of publication. And what proportion is in open access. So we can have also an overview of not only the proportion of the number of papers made open access, but the proportion in budgets. How much does it cost, the open access that we have now? And how much the system, the research system as a whole, is ready to pay? What percentage of the investment in research is reasonable to spend in publications? Does anybody know that? I think it's a question that the research system needs to respond or needs to address. These were my comments on monitoring.
Thank you, Lydia. Any other comments from the panel on that? Okay. Maybe one of the, I can also maybe show you the next slide on which you might actually comment, which is this one, which is the question of the funding used by the institution for open access to research publication. And it is maybe interesting, I don't know, you will comment on that, whether see that 85% of university draw that from the general institutional budget, and almost 70% use both national and European level project-based funding. And there is also national block grants of funding arising from private or public-private partnership, but this is only used between 14 and 28% of the surveyed university. Any comments? Maybe Lydia, because you were actually mentioning not exactly that, but some budget issues.
Yeah, well, I think this is a very good graph to have. I also in the same line, maybe not with the aim of oversimplifying things, but precisely with the aim of putting them at a systemic level. Next to the, if you look at this graph, it is institution budget, national budget, EU budget, national block grants, except the two last items that have some private funding. Everything else is public funding. So we need to be careful, because if it is public funding, does it matter that much if it is paid by the government directly, or if it is paid by the institutions, if it is paid by the researcher itself. It is all public money. Therefore, it is good to know who pays what, as long as the ultimate aim is to know how much we pay in total, because that is the important figure, and whether this is reasonable or not, and whether there are some things that need to be changed either in the academic sector or in the publishing sector or everywhere. But if we don't know exactly what are we talking about, it will be very difficult to take decisions.
Okay, just maybe a short comment on that. I mean, as if I get back my hat of former rector or president of Grenoble University, my concern would be if the global budget, and particularly what comes from the state, is including or not what will fund the open access. But of course, you didn't say the opposite, but that may be important to specify that there are funding issues, and of course we have to take that into account. Astrid, you want to comment on that?
Yes, also from a rector's perspective, because of course, in a certain sense, it doesn't matter who pays as long as it is the state. But from the perspective of a university, there are still huge differences how this is handled within universities, and even within institutional budgets, there are huge differences. When this is handled as a library question, the results may be totally other than if it's handled as a central strategic question from the university leadership. And also with transformative agreements moving away from APCs, in Sweden we have had a number of pilots together with the publishers, as they don't any longer have to pay the individual researcher to be able to publish open access. We have tried to redirect the funding streams so that we pay together, the BIBSAM consortium and the funders pay together the total amount of money that has to be paid in these agreements. And this is, I think this redirection of funding streams is a very important issue at this stage where we are right now.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on these funding issues? Or okay, maybe one question we have to, well, first of all, I have some questions that have been put in the QA section, and one of the first one we may try to answer collectively is what are our thoughts on the future of institutional repositories and green open access in the open science ecosystem? Any answer to that from the panel? Claire, you want to?
I'll give an answer to this one.
Fantastic.
I think, obviously, repositories are playing a hugely important role at the moment in enabling access. And with the aim of OASPA to move to things being open access at the time of publication, then the repository deposition by researchers plays a different function, and institutions can gather their content together. But I think it relies on the subscription model existing. If green is a strategy at the moment, and OASPA has always favoured immediate open access and at the time of publication and enabling that.
Okay, thank you. Bjorn, you want to comment on this?
Yes, I can say something to this. When was that? I think about 10 years ago, people called a general open archive or something like this. I think it was Pandelis Perakakis who coined that term. And now Spark, I think, recently called it something else. I'm blanking on the different names. But essentially, the point is that, of course, that you put institutional repositories and make them interactive such that you have one scholarly literature, because one of the main issues about functionalities, for instance, that I was talking about, one of the main issues is that we have a balkanized literature that isn't interoperable, like it's still 1665 or something. So one of the goals someone would have with institutional repositories would be to have them act as a single literature, but every institution runs their own portion of it. And so one way, there's many ways in which one could implement that technically, of course, but one way in which it is currently implemented, not in the ideal way, but it's too early to say that it won't ever get there. But one way how it is implemented is Open Research Central. And so essentially, if everyone would just have their own report, and with everyone, I mean every institution, would just have, so I'm just saying the future of institutional repositories, right? So if I could think of a future for institutional repositories, then it would pretty much look like, for the user, like Open Research Central, where you have a single place where you find all the literature that's posted in these institutional repositories, and you don't really, it's really opaque for the user, for the reader, it's really opaque where the article sits, and it's totally irrelevant where the article sits. And what you can have then, if you had only that, is that every institution can have publishers actually, and those would not be publishers anymore, they would be service providers. Service providers compete for publishing services. And so rather than researchers competing for spots in some antiquated paper journal that says, oh, we don't have enough space, we're running out of hard drives, that's why we can't really publish your article, we could then say, as an institution, oh no, sorry, you're too expensive and you don't have the functionalities that we need, we'll pick your competitor. And so this would create a market where today there is none. Now, I'm not an economist, but for me, to make it easier, rather than using adjectives, I say a market, and I can say that because I'm not an economist, a market needs to have competition. And right now, we don't have a competition. In subscriptions, there is no competition because every journal and every article is a monopoly because you can't get it anywhere else. The content is a monopoly. So it's all it is. It's not a market. It's a collection of monopolies. And the same is essentially true if you have a journal system where everyone tries to get into a journal, because I can't replace my biology journal where I need to publish with a physics journal. And this goes to, and even if there is some overlap in content, then you have an orthogonal prestige ladder, which serves to make every journal, again, a monopoly. So there is no competition. And that's the reason why APCs are going up, because there is no competition. And that's then finally what makes this whole discussion about moving to open access agreements, which is particularly horrible here in Germany, which makes this whole discussion completely absurd. Because what is the reason we're sitting here? The reason we're sitting here is because no library, no institution, I should say, no institution, library is just a part of that, dared cut or cancel subscriptions because they thought it would inconvenience researchers. So what is Germany doing now? They're saying, okay, let's replace a set of contracts that we couldn't cancel with a set of contracts that's even more difficult to cancel. Namely, if we're not just inconveniencing authors if we cancel it, we charge them, we force them to charge like whatever, 10,000 euros. That's, I would say, it's a little bit worse than having to click 3 times for your article. So this whole discussion on access and is completely besides the point, and makes essentially, no matter from what angle you look at it, makes everything worse. And the most absurd thing really is to make a bad kind of contract, replace it with an even worse kind of contract. So what should be happening is that we create a market because we have the money. And by we, I mean the scholarly community. We are the one that keep this thing running. And how do we keep it running? With our money. That's the only thing that keeps it running. Without the money, nothing works. And so what should we be doing? We should be using that money to create a market. Because if we can choose, if the institutions can choose, oh, I want to have this this new service provider that comes here that has, for the same price, I get many more functionalities. I get to have my data taken care of. My source code is going to be linked to my papers. And I only have to do this via drag and drop. Let's please not use this old publisher anymore that we used to use. Next year, let's please use the one that makes life easy for us, where we don't have to waste time on finding a place where to put our data, but where this is taken care of automatically by the infrastructure, where I don't have to worry, okay, how do I now make sure that the right version of my software is linked to the right part of the data in this paper, right? Like we have now, right? I mean, this is all on our cell phones in our private lives. This is all solved. And here we sit in a work environment that is 30 years behind what we're carrying in our pockets.
Okay, that was a very clear message. Can I ask from some reactions from Jan, from Monique, from Jan? It disappeared. No, you.
I did. Yeah, I was trying to press my my mute button, and I pressed my camera, so running away. No, I mean, the last bit of what Bjorn described, I don't see why there is any barrier at the moment. I mean, if there is a market for that, if there's a willing buyer, that is a service that someone can provide. And it doesn't seem to me to be implausible that they could do that. There is something
people like you prevent the market from happening.
You've had the floor.
You have the floor.
I mean, I don't recognize the characteristics of the market that Bjorn says. I mean, I think the idea that every single piece of content is a monopoly is an implausible scenario. I mean, no market is ever assessed in that way. And so I don't think you should look at the market in that way. And actually, this constant refrain about the market. I mean, we have incredibly low barriers to entry. You have companies that are able to come in and scale. I mean, if you look at NPDI or Hindawi, but obviously now bought by Wiley. But I mean, there are very low barriers to entry in these markets, and so competitors can enter. Competitors can set up a journal. Competitors can set up an open access platform. So I think we need to get away from this idea that there's some sort of constraint on all of these things. I certainly agree that publishers are, will continue to need to improve their services. That's why STM set up STM solutions. That's why we're working on seamless access. That's why we're working on Get FTR. We have to make, we can and should be improving the systems constantly. But something Bjorn said in his original comments, he said, not a whole lot has changed. And sometimes there's a reason for that. Sometimes it may be because over hundreds of years, publishers have developed incredible knowledge, experience, skills, efficiencies, and abilities to be able to provide these services. And going back to the earlier discussion about how much, I see Jean-Claude Bergerman has mentioned in the comments, this is a very, very, very small proportion of research expenditure. We don't talk about all of the forms of research expenditure in the same way. We don't talk about Bunsen burners and labs and all of those inputs, all of which cost money. But it provides an incredibly important solution. Now, for all of the very active activists that are concerned about changing the way all of this works, there are many, many others that are pretty happy getting on with their lives, with their research, submitting it, ensuring that it's checked, ensuring that it's verified, peer-reviewed, so on and so on, and those services continue. And I just think that there will be many different models. There are many opportunities for people to come in and compete, and many people do. But there are many people that want to have the services from the publishers as they are, and I think we have to recognize that.
Okay. Claire, please.
I just wanted to respond to say that I represent publishers, not activists. And I don't think the market is very healthy, and neither does OASPA. And this is some work we're undertaking this year, which is very in line with what EUA is doing to look at the drivers and the sustainability and the equity in the system. And I think, publishers' services, they are important, but they don't have to look like a particular thing. That was the point I was trying to make earlier. There's lots of different types of publishing organization. I'm not even going to use the word publisher, and lots of ways that publishers are thinking about how to do things differently. And we have overlay journals, we've got journals based on GitHub, we've got software, we've got all kinds of different approaches to changing the system and offering something different. But it's not easy. It's not an easy market, and I think I disagree with your point that it's easy to enter and to scale and to fund these things, and particularly to fund them in a different way. And quoting Ralph Schimmer, who I'm a huge fan of, I don't know if he's attending today, but there was the point with OA 2020 that all of the money is there to shift everything, but it's only the money that we're spending on the things now, or that you as institutions, EUA members, are spending on things now, and to keep them the way they are. And to do things differently means thinking about funding differently, thinking about changing the revenue streams, and creating something that encompasses all of these different solutions. And we have journals that are and publishing organizations and platforms that are run by scholars. They don't have professionals involved at all, and they have difficulties, technical difficulties mostly, that we support with, but they are able to provide the scholarly services for quality assessment of content, etc. That are all the nuts and bolts that go into making open access publishing reliable and trustworthy. So that's just my response on the market as it is.
Okay, one way to look at that is also to determine, or to have some views on the fact that could we change the career assessment? Could we change the assessment itself? Because on what you said, actually, Jan, one thing is important is also the fact that the way we do it is actually linked to a very, I would say, traditional way to publish and to score the journal, to score the research itself. It's any views on that? I hope so. But Astrid, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I would say that I would like to get back to what Lydia said before, that we are really going through a paradigm shift here. I think it's very important. And so it's not only about research assessment, but also what Monique said in her introduction about the work being done in the Netherlands, for example, right now, and in many other countries as well, to move away from this monitoring of journal impact factors and whatever, this quantitative way of doing research assessment. This is the absolutely most important part, that we are entering a new scientific paradigm, and where perhaps the not the article as such as object is as important as the total work you've been doing in research data, in other forms of reports, and whatever you do as a scholar. And this is also why I believe that these issues are really today questions for university leadership. They need to be supported and driven by university leadership, because we have the responsibility for how our research is done and for the quality. And it's also all about the quality of the research output. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other? Yes, please, Bjorn.
Yeah, I can chime in there for a second, because this now has turned up a few times with regard to the contradictory forces that we feel when we're evaluated, when we're authoring. And this harks a little bit back to probably the one single thing that Ian Moss said that wasn't a joke, namely that on the long list of things that the taxpayer pays in terms of research, it really is a tiny amount, but that goes to publishers. But it's similar with real world parasites. They often draw very little blood, like a mosquito, but what's really dangerous is the disease that they carry. And so Monique Trump already alluded to that in a little bit. But the contradictions in the forces are just one of many examples of how absurd now, over the last 3 decades, essentially, this entire system has become. I mean, for me as a German, Kafka springs to mind. But the situation for us researchers is in fact captured much more accurately by Joseph Heller's Catch-22. And it even famously features Milo Minderbinder's incredibly profitable syndicate, where everyone has a share. So there's more than just one parallel to Catch-22. And the fact that we live this absurdity today, and we talk about it in serious terms as this was the most normal thing in the world, that should us all give us pause. That this is a real life absurdity, and we treat it like an academic thing. In principle, it should make us first laugh, then cry, and then angry. And if you haven't read Catch-22, you should, because we are living it today. But it doesn't end there. Another absurd aspect of this is that we pay about 10 times the publication costs every year to those legacy publishers, who then go on and use all that money that they don't need for publishing against us by paying armies of lobbyists in Brussels, Washington, Berlin, or what have you, by sponsoring institutes that openly advocate installing spyware in university networks. I just alluded to that previously. Paying politicians to draft bills against making knowledge public, launching frivolous lawsuits in several countries in an attempt to intimidate a single young woman in Kazakhstan into submission. A woman, by the way, who has done more for access to literature than 100 EUA open access papers or webinars or meetings all taken together could ever do. So the way out of this absurdity is technically simple. We need to stop paying for it and use 10% of that money to buy the technology that is off the shelf. And so because that already exists, this wouldn't even be disruptive. We can do this by ourselves. So quitting this addiction, cold turkey, has been possible for nearly a decade. And it doesn't disrupt scholarly publishing if we do it correctly. But instead of just leaving this absurdity behind us 10 years ago, we still sit here in front of our screens and discussing if the emperor's clothes are more like greenish gold or a golden green, while the tailors of Milo Minderbinder's syndicate laugh all the way to the bank.
Okay, I think we get that. Maybe I should ask all of you, because we are close to the end, to have a sort of few words of conclusion, if any. Monique? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it switched off again. So yeah, I think the discussions reflect the position we're in, as Björn says. I think it's done in all different type of directions, from publishers to research evaluation to open science to scientific integrity, which we didn't really discuss, but you alluded to. I mean, the fact that we are pushed in this system makes people publish things they might or should not publish, and because it's not open data or open access yet, they get away with it as well. So the entire system needs to change. And I think that's, for me, the only conclusion I can draw at this stage. And that needs interaction with all stakeholders. And like Astrid was saying, it especially since it concerns careers and careers perspectives, etc., it needs to include leadership at universities.
Very good. Lydia?
Yes, thank you. Well, my last remark would be to, yes, the whole scientific community needs to make an effort to go back to the basics, to give the scientific community the leadership in making, and the leadership and the ownership of the process of communicating and assessing the research. And I think not only, because of course there are institutions, there are governments, but certainly I think there is a clear role for the scientific community here to take the lead and to speak up loud of what is important for research. And access is one of the most important things for researchers, access to information. And I think the access, the transparency of access, the transparency of the process to facilitate the labor of a researcher, that should be put at the center of the dialogue and make everything else revolve around it. So that's my plea, going back to the basics.
Okay. Claire?
I don't really have anything to add to that. I agree with both of those statements. And I think, you know, I represent the community that is working towards, you know, providing that access and trying to do it in a way that will allow access for everybody and be a system that works into the future.
Thank you. Jan?
I think these are important points that are made, and our members, as I said, are working on solutions with all of you, and you know, are publishers of the vast majority of open access journals and articles at the moment. I just say again, the important thing to recognise is that publishers do make significant investments in manuscripts, and including the period between submission and acceptance, and this can't be shortcut. Now you can do it in many different ways, in many different models, and you know, Claire has many members that do it in very, very interesting ways, as do we. The important thing is that those steps from audience detection and cultivation to ethics, formatting, editing, detecting plagiarism, peer review, publisher safeguards of quality are things that it is really important to maintain. And whatever you do, or whatever is decided, or whatever the solutions that come into, have to have that as the primary objective, I think.
Okay. Jan, thank you.
I think I have said what I need to say.
That's very clear. Astrid, you will conclude actually the conclusions.
Oh, thank you. I think the most important things have been said, and I strongly agree with what has been said about the scholarly community reclaiming its responsibility and its necessary role in this turn to open access, and that it is really a question of the whole life of the scholarly community, and it's as Monique also underlined, the research integrity, and there are so many issues related to this. So reclaiming our access to open access. That's what how I would like to conclude.
Thank you very much. I must mention that we had up to 250 attendees, something like that. Still now, at the very end, we are on 190, something like that. So I want to thank very much all the panelists who accepted this invitation. That was, I think, a lively discussion. I hope that was useful. I want also to thank the member of the program committee, the EUA expert group on Science 2.0 and open science, the group of negotiators, the steering committee of the Read and Publish study. I also, and really very frankly, want to thank the colleagues from the EUA Secretariat, in particular Aurélie Clenet, who was, and our former colleague Lena Snow, were absolutely essential for this webinar. The webinar series continue next Tuesday, and there are other EUA webinars that are coming. You can check the EUA website for more information and registration. So again, thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye-bye.